Thanks everyone for joining. My name is Bilal. I'm with the marketing team at Data Science Dojo. I'm here with Emma Doll and Anu Sharma. They work at Statistic, and they'll be talking about online experimentation and testing. So I'll let them take over. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Bilal. Hey everybody, my name is Emma. This is, I'm not sure which way, Anu. We are both from Statsig. We are in office, so we're actually, I think that's a little bit different than a lot of other folks. We're super excited to talk to you about experimentation today. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. So we are both from Statsig, like we were chatting with Nathaniel a little bit about. We are a Series A startup, and we'll give you a little bit more context on that. I also do some contract teaching for Data Science Dojo, and we're just super jazzed to tell you guys a little bit about experimentation and how you can level up your growth. So before we get going, let me give you a quick game plan. We're going to do some intros on our end, and then like any good webinar, we're just going to test you immediately. And then after that, we'll talk a little bit about levels of experimentation, what all is out there and how you can approach it, and tactically how we suggest that you run your first test. I really love teaching, and I find that one way that people stay engaged is if I put a lot of memes in my presentation. So hopefully that works for you guys. So who are we? We are both from Statsig. Statsig is a company founded by ex-Facebook employees, and our focus is taking the experimentation tools we had at Facebook and putting that in your hands. And a lot of what we're going to talk about today is all of the techniques that we learned at Facebook that you can apply to help your company grow faster. I actually am from Snowflake, and a fun fact about me is that I love memes.
Hi, and I'm Anu. I'm a PM at Statsig. I come from Amazon with where there's a lot of experimentation, but then there was a whole set of things that I loved so much about those tools, but then also found this team from Facebook that loved their tools of experimentation as well. And so I'm really enjoying building some of these same tools for the rest of the world.
Right on. Okay, so let's get into a pop quiz. So we're going to give you a couple options of different variants of tests that companies have released, and all you have to do is pick which option on the poll you think is the better choice. So for this first choice, it is a test from Humana, or an advertisement rather from Humana about their Medicare plan. Version A, which is a little bit more text heavy, has lots of data in it, and version B, which is not so much. So let's see. Okay, great. Yeah, if you guys want to throw in the chat, that would be great. Or just think about it in your minds. Okay, let's see. Cool. Okay, so it looks like I'm seeing mostly A's. It turns out that version B actually got about 430% more click-throughs for a couple reasons. Some of it was because it was a little bit simpler to read. The fonts were different colors, different pictures. So let's look at another example. All right, this one was from a mobile phone carrier like Verizon, and this was an actual printout from a couple of their screens about buying a phone plan. So on the left, we have version A, and on the right, we have version B, look a little bit different. So which one do you guys think more users bought phone plans from? Nice, okay, good guesses. I also thought B, but it turns out that A is actually the better choice here because users can see every single option at once, and even though it's less visually appealing, it's a lot clearer for users to get through. B, you kind of have to toggle in between a couple options, which makes it a little bit less accessible. All right, we're going to do one more. So this is from the Facebook newsfeed, and these are actually screenshots I pulled from my newsfeed. A couple articles, a couple videos that I got recommended in my newsfeed. So which do you guys think is better? A, which is a makeup tutorial, or which got more clicks, right? Makeup tutorial, or B, which is 14 craziest animal fights. So you guys are all like me, and you also picked 14 craziest animal fights. You might be really surprised to learn, though, that this video of a snake fighting an elephant is not real. And it's kind of clickbaity. And when I clicked on it, I was very upset that there was no snake fighting elephant video. And it turns out that a lot of people are upset when they click on things like this because they expect one thing, they get something different. And this is a great example of thinking about what metric you're optimizing for. So if I'm optimizing for clicks, 14 Craziest Animal Fights will win. Everybody's going to click on it. They just can't stop themselves. If you're optimizing for user retention, though, probably not. People are going to get upset. They're going to stop using your platform. So this is one of the things that we like to talk a lot about at Statsig is sometimes even if your metrics are moving in the way that you anticipated, there can sometimes be unanticipated consequences elsewhere, like downstream metrics or people purchasing less or staying on your platform for less time. And these are all things that you should probably consider. And this is part of why we're really big proponents of experimentation. So let me tell you a more tactical story about experimentation and how sometimes you can find interesting things that you didn't expect. So when COVID happened, there was a huge internet meltdown in the spring of 2020, and governments reached out to companies like Facebook and Google and Netflix and said, hey guys, you need to lower your internet consumption. You need to use less broadband, which meant that providers like Facebook had to release videos that were lower quality. And at Facebook, every single thing that they release, every new product you see, every new feature you see, they're always running tests on the back end. So when they released videos with lower quality, more pixelated, they also tested it. And it turns out that in some developing countries like India, phone plans are smaller and data is super expensive. So when videos are lower quality, people can actually watch more videos for the same amount of data. In the US, most of us have unlimited data, so people ended up watching fewer videos, but these are the kinds of things that we find when we experiment. Anu, did you have?
Yeah, it's just maybe just to build on that point, it's just sometimes we anticipate or our instinct says that this will be poor or bad for our customers. And we're completely surprised when you run an experiment. And in fact, the experiment reveals a little bit more about your customers that you hadn't imagined and helps you better understand your customers. So I think the point that I think, Emma, you're making is that a lot of times we have instincts and they tend to be wrong. And experiments help us uproot some of our fixed notions and better understand our customers.
Exactly. We have an ongoing joke at the office that we all think all of our ideas are great. Like, I think all my ideas are brilliant. But it turns out that when I test them, like maybe a third of my ideas are actually good. And when I can test them, I can more quickly figure out which ideas are good so that I can focus on those. And that's why testing is so important. So now that we've walked through a couple different types of tests, let's see what all this experimentation is about and where you can get started. So there's a couple different levels of experimentation. The place where most companies start is with user analytics. This is things like KPIs, right? How many people are coming to your website? And on the other end of the spectrum, we have companies like Netflix and Amazon that have a really high level of testing. So on this spectrum, think of it in terms of the amount of business understanding you have of the features you're releasing and how they're impacting your users. So on one end, we have probably very little understanding of the impact our feature has, and on the other end, like infinity understanding. And these are all of the different tests that fall in the middle. And we're going to talk about each one of these in the next couple slides. So first we have user analytics. User analytics is KPIs. Every business has KPIs. Generally, software companies, web companies have more of these to collect, but these are totally observational things like the number of people that come to your website or the number of unique visitors you have, how long people are staying on your site. It's just very, very high level view of who's coming, for how long, who are they. User analytics is important. It's kind of a building block, but it's not necessarily something that you can run a lot of tests on. The next level of testing and experimentation is web optimization, and this is very tactical. So web optimization, think of search engine optimization or technical performance or user experience. Web ops is like, am I making my button blue or green? What font am I using? And some level of web optimization is absolutely important. Like, you want a graphically appealing website. But a lot of web optimization is about moving clicks around on the site. If you have to have a shop button or like you have to have a buy now button, the color and where you move it at the end of the day is just kind of moving clicks from one place on your screen to another. And at the end of the day, you're not necessarily changing your funnel, right? If I make a more visually appealing website, but people don't like my product, at the end of the day, they're still not going to purchase it. And it's a little bit like rearranging chairs on a sinking ship. I like to think of web optimization as like, if I decided to go on a diet and instead of eating 2,000 calories in 3 meals, I ate all 2,000 calories still, I just ate it in 1 meal. Like the same amount of calories are coming in, it just depends where it's happening.
And maybe just to build on that, it optimizes for a very tactical metric on one page. And that doesn't mean that the next step that the customer is going to take is actually going to be appealing, satisfying, or result in a conversion. So taking the full product experience is probably more valuable, which is probably where Emma is going, rather than web optimization, which really just focuses on conversion and a very like, sort of tunnel vision point of view.
Exactly. And this is kind of the problem that we see with web optimization. It's just cannibalizing clicks, and people, if your root product isn't being addressed, web ops is not going to fix that for you. So let's talk a little bit about product experimentation. So product experimentation is all about driving change with your product. And when I say product, I mean the core thing that a user is interacting with. So think of Facebook's newsfeed. The newsfeed is a product. Think of Instagram's Messenger. The Messenger is a product. Like Zoom chats is a product. That's the actual thing you're interacting with. And this is what we want to be focusing on changing, not just which color the chat is. So Amazon sends marketing emails, for example. I'm sure you guys have gotten them because I get them all the time. And sometimes it can be a little bit frustrating when you get too many of them. And Amazon realized that they were optimizing for the wrong things. When you're optimizing for the number of clicks you get on an email, it takes me a couple of clicks to get to the unsubscribe button, right? So you get a lot of clicks. It's not really impacting your ultimate goal though, which is driving value for your consumers and probably retaining users or increasing purchases being made. So they started running tests and they figured out which emails they sent got the most unsubscribes. And they were basically able to measure the annoyance of their users and reduce that as much as possible while still sending those emails that are driving value. So web optimization doesn't change the funnel, but product experimentation does. And product experimentation is like, instead of moving my calories around when I eat them, I'm going to actually reduce my calories and I'm going to go on a diet and I'm going to start exercising and change the root problem instead of the kind of top level things that we're looking at. And product experimentation is all about driving really meaningful value. It doesn't necessarily mean testing every single feature within a product, though.
Sounds good.
So at the high end of the spectrum, we have feature experiments. So in product experiments, we're going to, let's test emails and see which emails work the best. Feature experiments say, okay, I want to test this email product, and I want to understand the impact of what I recommend in the email and the color of the email, and if I add an unsubscribe button and how many of them am I sending. So you're looking at the whole product and each individual feature within, which allows you to answer more questions about how you can move all of those levers to get the most growth out of your product. So a product level question is just, does this increase purchases? And for feature level questions, it's, does this increase purchases? And how are these 50 levers that I'm moving all changing this? So it's like going on a diet and exercising and also understanding every single calorie that you eat and every single calorie that you burn.
Yeah, and maybe just to add something, product experiments, you could start out with a hypothesis. You could start out by saying, hey, I want to reduce friction for my users as they sign up. And that there are only so many hypotheses that you can come up with. Feature level experiments makes experiments almost ubiquitous in the sense that every new thing, improvement, code change, everything that you do basically turns into an experiment or an A/B test, and you're able to measure what impact any improvement that you make in your software has compared to the default, which was the previous one. The way you would do it and why you would be able to do it is because the cost of an incremental experiment reduces to zero, in the sense that you don't have to think about it anymore. It was like, should I run this experiment or not? What is the hypothesis? And so on. You just kind of let it roll as part of your product development process. And as just like the way you have a best practice of how you roll out your features with feature gates, you implement an A/B test with every feature. And that's what Emma's saying is a feature level experiment, and just kind of becomes part of your development fabric.
So at a high level, this is kind of what we focus on at Statsig, is not just understanding the products you're shipping and the products that you're releasing to your customers, but how does all of the unique pieces of that product drive the value that you're looking for. So we're going to move on now to tactically how we suggest you running your first experiment. But before we do that, are there any questions that we can answer or any clarifications?
You guys run your features and probably get covered to some extent, but obviously each of the feature experiments are going to be affecting other features. So does your design continually consider the interconnectedness of one thing changing the other thing? So it's, instead of changing a product, you're changing features, and the feature change as you add or take away features may affect all the other features. Is that part of the intricacy of the design of your product, to be continually seeing how there's an interplay and then adding other outside the box possibilities? Because obviously you have a hypothesis and then you may not have thought of something. So that gets added on as well as the feature situation starts to develop. Is that kind of the design, or is it more static than that, more set?
Yeah, for sure. So there's a couple pieces to that, and I'll answer the first piece, and then I think Anu probably will have some additional things to add. But you're absolutely right. And this is one thing that you have to take into consideration is, if I change 5 things on my email, if I change like the color and the font size and the frequency, and each of them adds to a 1% improvement, I can't just add all of them up and say like, oh, in totality, I have a 5% improvement. So one thing that we really highly suggest is, when you're releasing all of these features, keep a group that you're not going to release any of them to as a separate holdout, so that you can evaluate the overall impact of your entire product and not just kind of the additive pieces of your features.
And I feel like I understood your question in the sense that, hey, there could be 5 different teams running 5 different experiments. How do they not run into each other? And are users seeing sort of an inconsistent experience between them? Is that the question?
Well, yeah. And also, like, if one change by itself may be a negative, but let's say something gets implemented and starts to be accepted, but then you try to implement something else that on its own would be positive, but then it becomes a negative relative to that first feature's presence. So that you have this complexity that starts to come into play. And I'm wondering if your system designs to continually check for that, because I may have a situation where, and subpopulations as well. So I have all these features, but I also look at, quote unquote, the feature of who it is I'm focused on. So teenage girl population, even though they're not all the same as a group, may have a certain response, whereas the 69-year-old golfer guys may be a different response to the very same feature, right? So there's complexity, and I'm wondering if you guys design that into the feature.
Yeah, there are several baby components, as Emma said, to the question, and the way Emma described it is perfect, is that if you have a series of experiments and each of them yield individual and independent results because they're independent tests, you may not be able to necessarily just add them up. And if you would create a holdout group is a group of customers who are not exposed to any of the features. And once, and that holdout group kind of runs for like a period of time, say 2 to 3 months. And so so it covers the period of time and the features that you've released in those 3 months. And then you're able to measure the impact of all of those aggregated features on the small holdout group. You should keep it small because they're not going to see all your new stuff that you're going to build, and then measure what is the difference between this holdout group and the rest of your group. And I think what you were alluding to also were kind of different segments, and you can measure your impact by segment. In fact, you can run experiments by segment, and that as well, it lets you not only sort of realize the value, and if you have a hypothesis that makes a specific segment experience better, that you can track that, but you can also track how a general experiment performs and what the metrics are for a given segment using user dimensions.
Right on. Okay, let's see. So now we're going to talk a little bit about you're setting up your, I forgot to change the text there, what your first experiment tactically should look like. So we work with a lot of folks that come to Statistic and say, nah, like experimentation idea, I love it. I'm bought into the idea. What do I actually do to get started though? So one thing that you could test that's really easy is reducing the friction on your registration page, for example. I actually tried to register for a new app this morning and it took me like 6 pages to get through all the registration and I didn't end up even downloading the app at the end of the day because it was like way too much information. And this is something that you can test to see how this is impacting your user experience. One thing we suggest is making a couple different test groups. So in a really traditional A/B test, you have your A group, which is your holdout, what you've already been using, and then you have your B group, which is your new variant you want to test. You can test a couple different variants too if you want to though. And that's what we're doing here. So let's say, for example, I have a hypothesis that maybe if I don't make people put their last name on my app registration, I'm going to get more signups. So I'll have my default, which is my last name is mandatory, and then I'm going to have one test group where the last name's optional and another one where they don't put the last name at all. And then we are going to collect metrics and see what the data says. And at that point, you need to crunch your data and run some statistical magic. And there's a couple different ways to do this. There's a lot of open source libraries available. You could do it manually if you want to. We don't necessarily recommend it for the same reason that I don't recommend you trying to dye your own hair. Like it could go well, but from personal experience, let me tell you, it normally doesn't. And at that point, you get to make the decision. And a lot of times you're going to get data that has some positives and some negatives. And it's kind of on you at that point to evaluate what's most important to you. One important thing to consider here is where you're going to be splitting up your different user groups. So for me, when I go to download a new app, it normally takes a couple clicks to get to the point where I'm actually registering. Excuse me. So I don't want to split my users as soon as they hit my website, right? If only 10% of my users end up registering, if I split at the very top, I'm funneling off a lot of people and I'm reducing my denominator so that I'm getting fewer people to test. So make sure when you're running these things that you're thinking about where you're making those decisions. Anu, I don't know if you had any.
That makes sense. Essentially, if you want to split your customers or into groups A, B, or C at the point where you're actually rendering the different experiences, not upstream, because that then increases the number of users who are being split and who are part of the experiment, which reduces the sensitivity of the experiment because there's a lot more noise now. Does that make sense? If you have any questions,
we'll
jump
take
in.
those, yes. One other thing that you might want to think about is the type of metrics that you're collecting. We work with a lot of folks that when they go to test, they pre-decide, okay, I'm testing user registration. I'm going to look at registrants and I'm going to look at the amount of time they spend on my site. And a lot of times, maybe I sound like a broken record here, there are unintended consequences or unintended actions to the new features that you release. So what we suggest is every time you're releasing a new feature like this, just test it across all of your metrics, and then you can evaluate which metrics are the most important to you, but you're not kind of imposing your own hypothesis on what you think is going to happen before the test is run.
There's a question here from Jeff who asks, what is the minimum amount of web traffic needed to run a test? And maybe I'll take this. Yeah. I'll take the question. It depends on a few different things. One is you want enough people to participate in the test for the test to have enough power. And the power of an experiment is its ability to detect a difference from the default and the probability of you being able to detect it, a true difference. If you have an underpowered experiment, then you will not be able to detect that difference. And if you have an overpowered experiment, your experiment will just kind of run for too long or will run for a period of time that basically you're running for months and weeks, and so that's not very useful. So we have a very nifty calculator on our website, and essentially it depends on how much of a difference that you're expecting to see. So if your minimum detectable effect that you want to see, for example, with your hypothesis is say 10%, that would mean that there is a smaller percentage of a smaller allocation of your traffic that you have to allocate to this experiment. But in fact, if your minimum detectable effect decreases and it shrinks to say 1%, then you'll need a larger number of customers to detect a smaller effect. And in fact, this is why larger companies like Google or Amazon are able to use a larger number of customers in their experiments, because they're really just optimizing for the next 1% of the improvement that they're trying to make.
Exactly. And, we work with a lot of small customers as well that ask us specifically that, like, I don't have that much web traffic. Am I going to be able to run experiments? And the good news is that if you are starting out with your website, you're probably trying to detect a much bigger difference, and you need a lot less data to make that happen. So testing is actually surprisingly accessible for smaller customers.
Right, and it depends on a lot of other things than just the traffic, Jeff. As you're calling out there, it depends on, say, what is the variance of that metric. So suppose you're using conversion rate as a metric. It depends on how much variance is involved in that metric. How much does it vary over a period of time? So smaller variant metrics are better than larger variant metrics. That will require a smaller sample size. And so there are a number of different ways. You can let an experiment run for longer and hence get bigger sample size and so on. So take a look at our calculator on statistic.com/calculator, and you'll see all the different knobs that you can turn.
One more. Great. So the takeaway that I hope you guys get from this is that growth is really, really important. And if you're not growing, you're probably shrinking. And growing is something that I think we kind of assume that, like, only a very small percentage of companies can do for product growth, big names like Facebook and Amazon and Google. But it turns out that, like we were just talking about, you don't need that much data to get started, and doing simple experiments and making sure that your product is what your consumers need is actually no superpowers required.
Yeah, I mean, we want to put the power of experimentation in the hands of every engineer. And the more you experiment, the more you learn about your users and your customers. And the faster you learn, the faster you grow. And so we want to help every company, every team grow, not just the big technical, the big tech. And so happy to answer any questions, or if you have an experiment that you want to talk about, we can dive into that too. I guess the one closing thought is that the great thing about software is that it's really easy to change. It's really easy to experiment. And it's very different from like hardware products that are harder to manufacture, harder to change. The great thing about software is that you can make a small change, a low effort change, and test it and realize more things that you can do and build for your customers. Yeah, a software is designed for any kind of business. For example, and especially if you're a smaller business, you have more lower hanging fruit. And this is a question from Jeff I'm answering, is your software designed for SMBs? The way I think about it is that if you're a smaller company, you have so much room to grow, and you should target a larger minimum detectable effect. And if the larger your effect is, the larger impact that you're shooting for, the smaller size you need to test it and to achieve statistical significance. Could you use your software on Shopify stores? That's a great question. We are working on a few different initiatives with a few partners, for example, partners like Thrasio and others who work with Shopify store owners, but we're also exploring how to incorporate Statistic as part of your Shopify application, if that's what, and Jeff, do you work on a Shopify application, or do you help others sort of build their app?
Thanks for taking all the questions too. I really do. I don't mean to throw them all at you, but it's really interesting to me. And the answer is no, I don't work on a Shopify store per se, but personally, I've actually been thinking about getting into it and like ways of which to ensure that my Shopify store performs well through testing. And I have a lot of work to do, but just an initial kind of thought.
Okay. Yeah, we'll definitely keep you updated on things that we're cooking. We're definitely exploring the space. And so we'll write a blog post maybe about how to get your Shopify store set up with an experiment.
Cool. Thank you very much. It's been great.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Jeff.
you bet. It looks like we have one other question from Vineeth about cost. And I realize that maybe this should not be a Statistic pitch, but if you are interested in running experimentation on our platform, at least, we'll give you 5 million free events a month so that you can mess around with it yourself and see if it's a good fit for you.
I have a quick question kind of on Jeff's question as well. Is Amazon looking at working with you as well for some of the smaller customers that may be partnering with Amazon and allowing them to use your product? And does it merge well with the other statistical tools being used by Shopify and by Amazon and Google and Facebook? Are they favorable to your product in terms of making it be a easily integrated technology for smaller companies to utilize to maximize their partnerships?
That's a really great question. To be honest, we haven't approached Amazon specifically, but we have explored Shopify Dev and the developer community and how we could incorporate Statistic as part of your Shopify application development experience, but also for merchants. So we've explored both avenues. I don't know how optimistic I am about Amazon on their website enabling experimentation, but it's definitely worth exploring. It's a great idea.
We had one more question about if you need a data science team or if it can be used by engineers and PMs. A lot of the companies that we're working with are actually picking us specifically to level up their PMs and their engineers without necessarily needing to hire a whole bunch of data scientists to do that.
Yeah, we empower data scientists. We help them grow leverage within their company. So in many ways, sometimes they turn into bottlenecks because they have to look at so much and get so much done for different teams within their organizations. We help them do more with less because we do all the grunt work for them. And so they don't have to go combing through the data for every experiment and verify that it's working properly.
Great. Well, if you guys have any other questions, we are both on LinkedIn, so feel free to reach out to us. And Data Science Dojo also has a ton of resources. I don't know if there are any final questions.
Bilal, do you have anything else for us?
No, I don't think there are any questions on YouTube. So these were pretty much it. If anyone else has any question, please feel free to use chat.
Perfect.
Okay.
Well, thank you guys so much for taking the time out of your day to talk a little bit about experimentation with us, and we really appreciate it.
Thanks everyone for joining today. Thank you, Emma and Anu. It was a great webinar.